And I would like to welcome both Bridget and Sandra from the Economy for Common Good. This has been a long time coming, and I'm so pleased that we have managed to finally have you here. I just tell you very briefly, although most of you would have read, that the ECG, Economy for Common Good, is a global social movement with a new sustainable economic model that benefits society at large, the planet and future generations. ECG has developed tools based on values that uphold human and planetary thriving, and strategies to bring them all into every aspect of our lives. They operate throughout Europe, South America, and now in Africa. And they work with different municipalities, organizations, and communities applying the ECG tool to achieve really far-reaching change. And I'm really excited to have you, and I won't take any more of the time and give it to you. I just want to say, please feel free if you have any comments in the chat. I'll be managing the chat. And even if you have questions that are coming up, don't worry, you can just put them into the chat as Bridget and Sandra are talking. Thank you. Over to you guys.
Thanks very much, Tarangi. It's really great to be here. Sandra's going to, well, should we say something about ourselves first?
Just very briefly, I think.
I'm a founder and director of ECG UK, which is the membership association for Economy for the Common Good in the UK. We also have a role in the international movement, and was introduced to the movement 5 years ago, and was very relieved to find that we can do the economy and society in a different way, a way that we feel it aligns with our own values, and bring our whole selves to work, and that work is about you know, our lives rather than we're serving work, as it were. Sandra, how about you?
Thanks, Bridget. So I'm actually not an economist. I'm a psychologist, and I'm an eco-psychologist, and I've really been preoccupied all of my life with the question, what are the conditions that call out the best in human beings, and what are the conditions that call out the worst in human beings? So the first half of my career was about diversity and inclusion, and the second half of my career has been about climate change communication. And then as I thought more and more about why more people weren't engaging with climate change, I had to recognize, of course, it's not just about psychology. The economic factors are pretty critical in creating sets of conditions. And I was really delighted to find Economy for the Common Good a couple of years ago. So I still feel, you know, quite young compared to the experience of Bridget in terms of understanding the economy, but it's been fantastic to get involved with that. So we're very pleased today to be able to share something of it with you all.
Thank you. So let's have the slides. And I'd just like to add that I'm not an economist either. My background's more in sort of marketing and communications. We're not getting technical here, and this is the whole point of Economy for the Common Good, that it's about people. It's about people designing the economy, and I quite like the work of Nile Rodgers, the disco bass player with the band Chic, and Nile's key approach to songs is you start with the refrain, start with the chorus first, and then keep repeating it throughout the song. We are family, for example. So our kind of main points in this presentation are that the economy can be repurposed for the well-being of planet and people. And in doing this, this gives organisations the opportunity to reimagine their role and their contribution to society and the world. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay. Hold on a second. All right, so I'm not sure what the problem is. Hold on a second.
You press your down arrow.
Yeah, I've been doing that. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so our themes today, the presentation will be in 3 sections. We're going to first of all look at what are the issues that ECG sets out to address. Then we'll look at ECG as the model, and finally the implications of ECG for systemic change. And at the end there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussions. Thank you. So first of all, what does ECG set out to address? And we will start. So we're all aware that we're faced with a number of crises, and whilst we don't want to trivialise through this cartoon the really serious nature of what we've all been through, what we're going through, and what lies ahead, it's really clear that we're not doing what is necessary or sufficient to tackle these major crises. And of course, we know that the impact of each of these crises upon inequality are enormous. Thank you. And the donut model, this image represents where we need to aim for. So this is Kate Raworth's donut economics model. And what it's describing are the planetary boundaries in the outer ring. And in the inner ring, it represents the 12 dimensions which make up the social foundation for meeting all our human needs. The green part of the donut represents the ecologically safe and just space in which humanity can thrive and in which all of life can equally thrive. So the outer ring, then those 9 areas, the planetary boundaries, are the Earth system processes that regulate the state of the planet. When we exceed these boundaries, we risk creating irreversible tipping points and thereby lose our opportunity to enable Earth to restore its ability to self-regulate. The 12 dimensions of the social foundation in the inner ring are derived from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so these are the internationally agreed minimum social standards for human welfare. But we know it's not just about safeguarding the human species. The profound lesson and opportunity facing us is to realise that there is no human safety without planetary safety. Our well-being and of Earth are inextricably linked. And so there therefore can be no organisational safety without human safety and planetary safety. And this reframes the role of organisations, which lies at the heart of what economy for the common good is all about. ECG provides a way for organisations in all sectors to reimagine their purpose and their role in the world, and to do what Kate Raworth describes as moving from being degenerative by design to becoming regenerative by design. And it looks like we've lost our presentation. Just bear with me. Okay, can we see that? Is that back on?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this also chimes with what the general public are increasingly expressing about how they're feeling and what they want. There is ever greater focus on how business in particular conducts its affairs. And there are a range of initiatives which aim to help that sector improve how it does what it does. But ECG is thinking on a bigger scale. What we see is that there's a greater change is needed, a systemic change. That systemic change is no less than re-embedding the economy so that it functions within the ecosystem. This requires a major change in our mindsets what we think the function of the economy is. And we need to move from this picture to this in order to create this, where the well-being of people and the environment becomes the highest goal of economic activity. So what needs to happen to affect this change at a macro level? We need to envisage it as a journey. We need to address the macro principles of how the global economy functions. And so now it is driven by the principle of maximizing shareholder value. Here the benefits are internalized and the costs are externalized. This comes as a direct consequence of a model which defines the goal of business as only to make profits for those who fund and manage the business. In this model, value is shared, and some parts of the system are moving towards the idea of sharing the benefits a little bit more, doing the same as what we're doing now, but trying to do it in a less harmful way. But where we want to move to is to this model, where value is for the system. The economy and the businesses that are engaged in it here understand that their role is to generate value for the whole system, not simply for the select few. This means that our frames of reference for what the economy is for need to expand beyond providing goods and services for money, profit and GDP. Rather, the economy needs to become a net contributor to the health and well-being of society and the natural world, and to ensure life of future generations of both. Instead of externalizing costs, it's about externalizing benefits. Sandra, are you back with us?
I am, but I'm just needing to find how I can make this full screen.
I'm sharing, so you don't need to.
Yeah, but at the moment you're very small on my screen, and so I can't read anything. Okay, hold on a minute. Okay, I think we may be there. No, I can't see anything, Bridget. I think you'd better carry on presenting this bit, and I'll try and work out how I can join you.
Okay, so we have previously known what the economy is for. In the constitutions of various countries, there is a clear stated intention of the economy serving people and the common good. And now we are also remembering. The insight by Robert Kennedy points to something very important. Not everyone knows that after the London King's Cross fire in November 1987, GDP for that financial year achieved an unusual high. When it was analysed, it was discovered to be a direct result of the fire because of all the emergency and rebuilding work that was required. A stark reminder that we need a different way to measure what we value. And more recently, we've had some positive statements about finding alternative measures. With these from the European Commission and the European Council. So when we sent Apollo 11 off to the moon, it was not a question of setting the coordinates and trusting in the straight line. It was a matter of constantly making mid-course corrections. And this is what is needed now that we're remembering what an economy is supposed to achieve. So let's have a look at those differences between the current system and ECG. In the current system, the goal is money, the maximising of profit. The strategy is competition. And the success indicators for businesses and organisations a profit measured in the profit and loss account and balance sheet, and GDP for governments. In ECG, the goal is the common good and money becomes a means. The strategy is democratic collaboration, and the success indicators are the common good balance sheet for organisations, which measure what we truly value, and for cities and states, it's the Common Good Index, and we'll explain what that is a bit later. So that brings us to the end of our first section, and we'll now look into ECG as a model and how it functions. Sandra, how are you doing?
Bridget, I think you need to be on standby because I seem to be dropping in and dropping out, something to do with my connection, but I think you need to keep managing the screen. So if you'd like to go to the next. Okay, so the main tool for companies and organisations to get involved with economy for the common good as a starting point is to produce a common good balance sheet. And what you're looking at is the common good matrix, which is the main template through which a balance sheet is produced. Now, this is version 5. The first version was produced 10 years ago.
That sounds like we've lost her. So this is version 5. And it's updated each time with the feedback from businesses and consultants and the people who are using it. So it's in itself, it's a democratically evolving tool. So it applies these four values: human dignity, solidarity and social justice, environmental sustainability, transparency and co-determination across these 5 stakeholder groups of suppliers, owners and financial service providers, employees, customers and other companies, and the social environment. And the Common Good Balance Sheet is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we've sort of tracked these across the matrix here. And this is important as the world's increasingly coalescing around these goals as a focus for and measure of improvement. And as we saw earlier, they also inform the inner circle of the donut. So let's have a quick look at those stakeholders. And most of these groups of stakeholders are ones that you would recognise. But there are areas where the vision is expanded. So in the ECG model, for the groups B, D and E, we're going to highlight, where there's a slight difference in our understanding of these stakeholder groups. So let's start with Group B for owners. For ECG, the question of ownership and the use of money is about safeguarding the purpose of an organisation in its attempts to create value for the system, rather than being thrown off course by servicing remote investors. When the owners are part of an active group of stakeholders directly involved in an organisation, as is in the case with the organisation pictured here, which is an arts centre, they can steward the organisation to ensure that the greatest value is derived both socially and economically. This can't be said about the current model, which prioritises economic value above all else. For the stakeholder group of customers and other companies, we have a different approach. The usual expectation in the prevailing model is that other companies in the same sector are competitors fighting to win scarce resources in a win-lose battle. Within ECG, we see those companies as allies and seek to cooperate with them on shared problems. And this image points to one of the benefits of this approach, which is that it maintains diversity, vital to a healthy, resilient system. We're not pretending that competition doesn't exist, but our emphasis is different. ECG recognises that each business impacts on other businesses within its sector and society for good or ill, and that consultation and cooperation can minimise the ill and maximise the thriving. And in our stakeholder group E, which is the social environment, ECG has a different approach too. So we're looking at humanity as a whole, including future generations. So that notion of the consideration of the 8 billion people on the planet and the people to come. And that's thinking in terms of indigenous wisdom thinking, which thinks forward 7 generations, so about 200 years. So how realistic or possible do we think this is within our current emphasis on instant gratification? How good are we at thinking in such long time frames? When the matriarch in the centre of this photograph tells her great-grandchildren stories about her parents' and grandparents' lives, while imagining aloud what great-grandchild's future might be like, she's living the connection between 7 generations and 200 years. And there's a really great book by Roman Grzanik called The Good Ancestor, which has got some really great exercises about long-term thinking. Well, I mean, it's all about kind of capturing that whole long-term thinking, and some really good exercises. Imagining, if you were born, you might be born in any time period, in any social class, in any group. Now go and design the policies for, how the salary spread in an organisation should be, or some policies. So it's a really interesting read. Okay, so let's now look at the values in a little bit more detail that are applied to the stakeholder groups. Human dignity, solidarity and social justice, environmental sustainability, transparency and co-determination. And we'll look at 2 of them and provide an example of good practice in a European company. So human dignity in the workplace. Here's an example from an organisation called Fahnengärtner, which has been manufacturing flags and advertising materials since 1945. The corporate culture of the Austrian family-owned company is characterised by meaningful jobs and a high degree of co-determination and self-organisation of the workforce. The health programme, which was initiated by employees and has won several awards, offers a company kindergarten and a regional company kitchen, as well as a wide range of training opportunities and sports and health courses. The company also places great importance on equal opportunities, and 50% of management positions are held by women and 50% by men. And another example is of the value of solidarity and social justice in the supply chain. And this example is from Märkisches Landbrot, which is a Demeter certified bakery and mill. And since 1992, it's been buying its grain directly from regional farmers in Brandenburg, where it's located, and nearby Poland. They have this annual roundtable for grain where all farmers producing grain for the bakery, as well as other Demeter bakeries if they wish, come together to negotiate expected harvest results and set the year's prices, quite independent of the world market. If promises cannot be kept due to crop failures, for example, the group is called again to renegotiate. At the end of the round table meeting, farmers vote anonymously on whether the company, Märkisches Landbrot, may use the Fair Trading and Regional Partner logo. So they're going outside of the market to have a discussion about what does each side need. And on the ECG website, on the EcoGood website, there are more examples. So for each of the 20 themes of the matrix, there is an example of a company highlighting good practice in that field. And here are some examples of companies that have done a common good balance sheet, and they're sort of quite varied organizations. And now we'll have a look at the benefits to companies. So what are the benefits of doing this? In 2018, there was a survey by the University of Valencia into 206 ECG companies. And it showed that staff motivation and well-being have improved, reducing recruitment needs and costs. Corporate reputation has been enhanced. Carbon footprint has been reduced. There's greater sustainability in their supply chain. Higher levels of customer trust and loyalty, really low turnover of staff, and they find that they have people who are kind of overqualified for jobs applying because people want to work for a company that's driven by values and purpose. And it also found that there was no detriment to sales. 96% of companies reported that, and 26% of companies reported positive impact on revenue. And there was no adverse effect on profit. In fact, in some cases, the profitability had improved. And so we see that, and so now we've been looking at companies, but here's an example of a business school of Lausanne, who completed a common good balance sheet in 2014. And we're going to see how this approach can create a whole system change. So here, the business school shows how they express their core values of responsibility, sustainability, and entrepreneurship, the values that arise from those and how they all feed each other. And I'm sure we all recognise the outer ring of values as relating to any business school, any leadership role. And it's interesting to see how they are shaped by the interplay between the three core values. And it's worth just kind of having a look at how they describe their mission. It's BSL's mission to provide a learning platform for individuals and organisations to thrive by co-creating viable business solutions for our planet and its people, enabling business to become a powerful driving force to create a world where everybody lives well and within the limits of the planet is the single biggest educational challenge for business schools in the coming decades. To achieve this multi-dimensional transformation, BSL builds its educational approach on the three cornerstones: responsibility, sustainability, and entrepreneurship. So to summarise the three boxes, responsibility includes questioning the way business has been considered traditionally in order to fulfil their collective societal mission. Sustainability includes not only reversing their footprint, but also to provide a positive contribution towards the environment and society for now and the future. Entrepreneurship includes replacing the quest of maximising monetary value with a balanced view of creating a social, environmental, and economic value that matters. And in preparing their Common Good balance sheet, it revealed what they call 5 blind spots. So they were quite an aware organisation, but going through the process, and this often happens with companies and organisations, the fact of going through the balance sheet and by its very nature that it raises these questions to raise consciousness about the issue. How is this value being lived in the organisation? It does often cause people to think about things that they've maybe not thought of before or not thought about in that way. And so for the Business School of Lausanne, they discovered these 5 areas where they had blind spots, and they set up green teams to address each one. So in the areas of workplace quality and affirmative action, promotion of environmentally friendly behaviour of employees, corporate democracy and transparency, ethical customer relations, reduction of environmental impact. So our next section will be about the implications of ECG for system change. And looking at the example is to come back to a company that we've met already. So Märkisches Landbrot. And when a company is on their way, what happens is that not only does their practice of the values strengthen, but they intersect and reinforce each other. The matrix presents them necessarily as rather siloed, but they're not. What Märkisches Landbrot are doing is not only about solidarity and social justice in the supply chain. In order to achieve what they have also needed to practice transparency and co-determination. They initially took huge risks in inviting their suppliers to be open with them about their needs and operational vulnerabilities, and of course to share their own, in order to be able to arrive at fair agreements and to understand the kinds of conditions which would require renegotiation. But the gains have been huge, not least taking them out of the precarity of the commodity markets. This is one of the main benefits of an economy for the common good, replacing extreme precariousness experienced by so very many people with greater safety and security. Another closely related benefit is that personal trust is increasingly built in communities, in business sectors, throughout supply chains, and so across different communities. This brings genuine transformation. Transparency and co-determination is a game changer in and of itself. In addition to all I've described, it produces genuine empowerment. When all players are empowered, know and trust each other well, and live economically and socially safer lives, we can see how these are the conditions for reducing violence, stress, fear, poor health. These are the foundations for widespread thriving. Sandra, I can see you've come back again now.
If you're willing, Bridget, I think it's better if you continue, because it seems that every time I start talking or moving, I drop out. So okay. Thank you for the invitation, but I think it probably is safer if you carry on. I'll join in with the discussion at the end. I think that's
right.
safer.
Okay. Right. So business, this is all in recognition that business is in an interconnected system. Additionally, applying the balance sheet to individual businesses with all these far-reaching effects is just the start for those businesses and other organisations. So let's come back to embedding the economy in human society and the environment, and also externalising the benefits. The simple and enormous shift that business and the universities that educate about business need to make is to recognise that they are always in an interconnected system and to operate accordingly. Every player in the system needs to reimagine their role and develop stronger collaboration. And we're going to look at what this looks like in two sectors, in local authorities and in universities. So in local authorities, there are a number of ways that local authorities, cities and states can engage with ECG, with their citizens and the organisations in their area to improve the quality of life. So one way is to promote ECG, the ECG model, to companies and organisations, supporting them to complete a common good balance sheet themselves. This is, for example, what's happened in the region of Valencia in Spain, where they've passed a law to promote ECG, promotion law, supported by 700,000 euros. The local authority can complete a common good balance sheet itself, looking at its own practices. It could convene a citizens' assembly where the residents all come together to compose a common good index. And what that is citizens and residents setting the 10 to 20 themes for what they consider to be to make a good life in their area. And we'll look at an example of that shortly. And when a number of towns have engaged with ECG, they can then cluster together to form a common good region. So let's look at that common good index. This is a real example of a German municipality that's putting this into practice. This webpage was created by and for the district of Hanseviertel, which is an area of the city of Münster, and it describes their vision for what they're calling their neighbourhood common good index. It's interactive and translates into English, and it has clearly been thoroughly thought out and designed with great care. It expresses their aspirations for the kind of society and community they want to create and live amongst. On the actual website, clicking on these circles takes you to their descriptions of how they want to live. And we've simply translated them to show you what this community chose to prioritise as the 16 areas which will provide them with thriving lives individually and together. Their authority is committed to facilitating this to happen, and the high-level consultations involved through citizens' assemblies enables their residents to be involved in budgetary priorities and decision-making that directly affect and improve the quality of their lives. This multiplied up is what systemic change looks like, when the benefits of prosperity are not only externalized, but democratically shared. Excuse me. For universities, there are also various ways for them to engage. They can themselves complete their own common good balance sheet, and they could do a similar exercise to the Common Good Index as a university community, setting for themselves what are their measures of success, what would make for a successful organisation and community. They can engage in research, publish papers and academic conferences around the theme of common good, provide ECG consultant training and applied modules. There are also universities that are putting on cross-disciplinary courses for the common good. For example, the University of the Applied Sciences of Burgenland, the course in the Economy for the Common Good or Economics for the Common Good teaches a holistic understanding of the economy related to and embedded in ecology, ethics, political science, history, sociology, and psychology. It repurposes both the economy and economics into the means to serve and satisfy the basic needs of current and future generations, respecting both the ecological planetary boundaries and fundamental democratic values. And there's also now chairs for the economy for the common good. The University of Valencia set up a chair for the economy for the common good. And resources to support systemic change. There's Christian Felber's book, Change Everything, published by Z Publications, and you can get it directly from their website. This outlines the whole model by Christian Felber. And his other book, Trading for Good, is also, I believe, published by Z Books. And we've recently just put together our 10 real-life prototypes for a common good economy. So in this publication, you will see everything that we've talked about today and more, and with really useful hyperlinks. Some of the links are still in German, I'm afraid, but we're kind of working slowly on translating those so that they're available. But with the translation software nowadays on the web, like DeepL, it's quite easy to get the gist of things. And the movement. So ECG is not just a kind of framework and a model, but it's also a global movement. There's 11,000 supporters from around the world. There's the International Federation of ECG now was set up by 9 countries, including Chile, Sweden, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, the UK, the Netherlands, and did I mention Spain? Spain, and now has expanded to Luxembourg. I said Netherlands, haven't I? I've forgotten the other 2. But we now have also 12 countries in Latin America who are working together in a Latin American group, very active, who have joined the movement. So there's activity in chapters in Africa. So it's a movement that is spreading around the world. So thank you very much, and thanks for bearing with us with our technical difficulties. And we'd very much like to hear your questions and discussions. And Tarangi, I will hand over you to moderate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So just because I know people drop off when it's question time, so I hope you don't. But I just want to remind everyone that there's also another talk on Commonwealth Lease ownership models by a Commonwealth lawyer tomorrow. So if you don't have the link, then I will put it into the chat very soon. But I want to kick off, or maybe Hannah, are you still with us? Yeah, Hannah, do you mind putting the link in the chat, please, so I can kind of carry on with the discussion. So thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible. Way worth the wait for you to come and do this talk for us. I think if you're shy, you can put questions into the chat, and I can filter those. But I want to give a moment to the audience to start with the questions before I jump in. So are there any questions, any comments, any discussion points you want to raise? Anyone? Don't be shy. Victor.
Yes, lots of the examples were German examples, and there were Lausanne was mentioned. Do you see like a geographical tendency where commoning is more institutionalized or widespread?
Sorry, is it? Could you just repeat the last part of the question? Is it?
Yes, do you see tendencies, geographical tendencies? Like I haven't seen much examples from the UK, for example, and lots of examples were from Germany. Is the reason that you have like a stronger network in these areas, or do you see that in Europe, for example, Germany or Switzerland is stronger in commoning and institutionalizing commoning?
So the movement started in Austria and spread quickly to Germany and Switzerland and Italy. So the bulk of the companies and organisations that have done a common good balance sheet are from that region. Spain is the next largest. The movement then went to Spain and to Latin America because Christian Felber speaks Spanish, so he did lots of work in that area. So it's more kind of active across those countries, and beginning to organisations doing balance sheets are kind of coming on now in other areas. But you're right. There's we've yet to have a pioneer local authority in business to complete a balance sheet in this country. Well, we have one consultancy firm that's got a common good balance sheet in the UK, but we're very much welcoming our first pioneer local authority.
Great. I have one question from Gemma. She's saying, I'm wondering how this model is disseminated as an idea to align with how do individuals, business, city councils and universities begin to make the change towards the ECG model. It's in the chat if you want to look at it as well. Both of you. So how it's disseminated as an idea.
Sandra, do you want to answer that one?
Well, I will, and I'll also, if I may, link it with Victor's question earlier. So when Bridget was talking about a movement towards the end of her presentation, the main way that ECG is spread is, as she mentioned, through chapters, and those are membership organisations, and those are with the intention of developing a very, very local focus. And that's the beginning of developing communities and developing ways of talking together about what is very important and what is very meaningful about how the economy impacts on our lives, and then working together in small and large local ways to see how change can be implemented step by step. And so those discussion groups, in a way, they may start out as discussion groups before becoming activist groups. Those are the lifeblood, really, of the organisation. And when they're strong enough and they feel that they understand the issues well enough, then it would be for them to start engaging on a local level. There also is a role, so in the UK we've set up, well, Bridget and her colleagues set up a community interest company, and part of what we have tried to do is hold public meetings and present the model to a very wide range of audiences. And I've certainly participated in a very wide range of discussions over the last couple of years with that kind of varied audience. I think it is worth, to come back to Victor's question, I think it is worth, so my own sense about is it a matter that there's more of a culture of institutions in Europe than here? That may be true, but I think there is another difference really between the UK and Europe, and that is our culture. I think it is fair to say that our culture is much more strongly individualistic than some of the countries where ECG has taken hold. And I would like to just draw a distinction between organisations, for example, like B Corp. You know, there definitely is a movement in the business community towards more ethical practice. But it's very interesting to me that where those companies look is an organisation like B Corp, which has the stated aim of enabling businesses to do what they do better, less harmful. So in the image that Bridget presented of the sets of 3 circles that eventually moved into a nested set of circles, B Corp is in the middle section, that it's about doing what business does, but a little less harmfully, or as much less harmfully as possible. And ECG is genuinely and, you know, far-sightedly about systemic change. And actually that can be quite a barrier. It's much easier for organisations to think about taking incremental steps and not changing very much than thinking about changing everything, which is the title of Kristen's first book. So I think it is important to take that into account. The culture here is a very, very different culture, and that what people can imagine as a positive change is in some ways quite limited. There isn't an appetite yet for systemic change, even though there are so many clear problems with the economy. So I'm sorry I took longer than I thought, but I thought it was worth addressing both. Great.
I'm just going to filter through the questions. So Tim says, how are political parties reacting to this proposition in the UK and elsewhere? And later on, he also says this seems to be quite in line with what local authorities and government are talking about with social wealth building. So I don't know if there's any response to that, or if you've had any experience of that.
Well, I might do the first part and hand over to Sandra for the Preston part. We've had discussions with local authorities, so politicians of different parties have been interested in the model, and it is a huge opportunity for local councils. If we think at the moment are in such a kind of dire position. I mean, they've had before the COVID crisis, they were having their budgets cut to the bone. Since the crisis, we're hearing of lots of bankruptcies, councils being on the verge of bankruptcy. And this approach, offers them a way of engaging with citizens and organisations in their borough to tackle issues that they alone cannot tackle. And if we just think about climate change and the responsibility for emissions, it's much wider than the actual council itself, but it's happening within the council, the local authority areas, to engage citizens and organisations in kind of reimagining the roles of organisations. And it's quite interesting. We did some sort of system mapping recently, Sandra and I, with an organisation, and we mapped, what is the system for this organisation in the UK. And as soon as we brought in the theme of the future, everything changed. Everything changed about the organisations in the system, how they relate to each other, and what their kind of purpose then was. And with a convening exercise like this, it's sharing the responsibility, but it's creating collective responsibility, which is a very empowering journey to go on in order to tackle, some of our really pressing issues. And I'll hand over to Sandra to talk about the community wealth building aspect.
So this is, there are two responses I just want to quickly make. One is this territory of community wealth building is another example of where ECG is not trying to be the total or totalizing or only model. We're very, very supportive, for example, of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies that developed a different approach to building or regenerating the local economy of Preston, and now that's spread throughout Lancashire. And what their approach has been to tackle the supply chain, starting with the local authority and then spreading that out to local businesses, but to not only encourage local purchasing, but to facilitate the setting up of locally owned and shared owned businesses, so collective, cooperative, social enterprises. And so when they are the business base in a local area, and then the council decides to use them to provide the council's needs, then that contains the wealth within a very, very local area and shares the wealth among the people who are only sharing the ownership of those enterprises. So it's a very, very powerful model, and we advocate that model. But where there is a connection and overlap is that those same businesses can use the matrix and the balance sheet to be even more rigorous about their own impacts across all the values and across all the stakeholder groups. So there's a very strong synergy between those approaches and the ECG model. I'd just like to add that in addition to those kinds of things, what ECG is also effectively communicating about and lobbying for, including at the UN level, is interim legal and financial incentives. So some of our most successful ECG companies, I'm thinking particularly of Vaude, which is an outerwear company. The CEO of that company has been very, very vocal with the UN about saying that they are being very successful. They're reaping all the benefits that the Valencia study revealed through that survey. And it is also true that their expenditure is much greater because they are being so much more rigorous about reducing their impacts on the planet. And so there are competitive disadvantages, even though they're doing so well. They could be doing much better if there were tax incentives at a global scale. This is where local authorities can help. They can, for example, waive some business rights to companies that engage with the Common Good balance sheet and the matrix. So, there are those kinds of strategic temporary levers that could be applied to provide incentives, and ECG does lobby on that level as well.
Great, thank you so much. So the next question from Antoinette. Do you have any examples of how the ECG model has worked in regions that are overcoming conflict? Are there efforts to target countries that are experiencing post-war reconstruction?
I can't think of any that come to mind, but it has been used. Was it Chile that were creating a new constitution, and so they drew on the ideas from ECG to kind of feed into that process.
I think that's a very interesting question, though. Yeah, thank you for that question. It gives me something to take away. Thank you.
Great. Mothio, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. I think it kind of links into what was said before, and maybe also to Timothy Flitcroft's question below, but it's about, so we've got these models and then you end up, I guess, promoting a model. And I was wondering about the cross connections between Kate Raworth's model and then, you know, in Wales, you've got the well-being, but how, because of the urgency of the need, because of climate change and so on, how can, rather than promoting a model, is there a way, can you see a need for coming together to see what's the commonality approach?
Yeah,
to
absolutely. Absolutely. And ECG always describes itself as being one of many alternatives. You know, there was Margaret Thatcher's famous saying, there is no alternative. And, you know, the answer is there are plenty of alternatives. It's not Tina, it's tapas. And Christian Falber's written a sort of theory of ECG. And in that paper, he completely acknowledges, you know, all of the commons, degrowth, the donut economics, lots of other models. And we are in partnership with organisations around certain activities. We're part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And we've also recently joined the Alliance for Corporate Transparency, which is where lots of NGOs and organisations like ourselves. Most recent activities are around the EU non-financial reporting directive, which is now turning into the corporate social responsibility directive. And the standard for that is looking to be very weak. And so the Alliance are lobbying for that to be strengthened, the social and ethical elements of that standard to be strengthened. And indeed, we have been involved in activities to create a universal standard. You know, so we're really clear that ECG is not the answer. ECG is a bridge to a new economy. And what the destination is that place where we live in balance, you know, not that it's ECG. So it's just a means to an end.
I suppose what's helpful with the ECG, as opposed to, I mean, you know, donut economics is fantastic in kind of talking about principles and talking about ideas, but what ECG does with the matrix, I think it makes it much more tangible in terms of how you can actually implement it. And there might be other ones, so again, it doesn't mean that that's not the way, but I mean, when you go to talk to an institution, you can't throw theory at them. You have to have something that this is how you can do it. Mortheo, you have your hand up.
Just so as a follow-on then, just to that, and can you explain, because I know donut economics have applied their model in a methodological way in Amsterdam and created a sort of a matrix there. So is there a difference between its matrix in Amsterdam and the matrix that you're proposing?
No, I mean, Amsterdam's an interesting example because in their impact strategy, ECG is present together with the donut. So they're kind of using the different models and tools for different purposes. Kind of using the Common Good balance sheet to kind of capture the impact. So they work side by side, yeah.
Sorry, Bridget, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Carry on, Sandra.
I just would like to also underline something, that at the heart of the model, the ECG model, is really the principle of including as many people as possible in any organisation or any community in coming to the decisions about what is important. And actually, there's a level, I know this is going to sound a bit airy-fairy, but there's a level at which that is the most important thing. What we all have to do is come to agreement about what are the values that we want to uphold and how are we going to create the quality of life and the quality of safety that we all need. And we can only do that by talking together. And so there's a level at which whatever the matrices are, whatever the models are, as long as they, at the heart of them, they are about people communicating in deep and serious and meaningful ways about what's important and how do we achieve together what's important. In a way, those are the most important things, because on a global scale, that is precisely what we have to do. And
but it's not,
I'd like to underline ECG as one approach that really achieves that.
Yeah, but I think it's also not about singularities of, you know, it's not a Marvel comic of, you know, the goodie and the baddie and the right and the wrong. So I suppose it is about having a multitude of systems. And I think it's more about then coming together to see, to very frankly and honestly see what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I think that's where, I suppose, with Tim's comment about other kind of that, you know, he says, I see a huge overlap with other movements such as Buona Vivre, Degrowth, Common Horizons, European Commons Assembly, which some of them I think also have a different purpose potentially from what I understand of some of them, but I suppose it is also to be aware of all that and to know all that, and then it's really personal choices of institutions. I mean, there are multiple things and ideas out there. There isn't a singular idea, and people can choose what feels correct and right to them, but it's more and I again, you know, at this platform, I'm happy to host anyone who has any models for us to really see what's out there. In a way, it's not really preferencing one over the other. So yeah, because sometimes yeah, sometimes there is that kind of thing of, but yeah, but there are other ones, but of course there should be as well. It's about plurality of it. Tim, is it anything you want to add to what you just wrote? Tim Flitcroft.
Yeah, I suppose what I witnessed many times conflicts within organisations, and I just wondered if you had any examples where people, you know, who've got power or wealth, or they've got an advantage by the status quo, which I think is, to me, the problem. How often can you give some examples of how you've managed to change that, where people have been willing to look to the common good and give up their existing? Because, I mean, what I always think about all of these groups, I'm not just talking about you, but also the other groups I mentioned, is that it's like we're expecting everyone to be as calm and as rational and as thoughtful as we like to think we are. But in fact, people are very emotionally attached to their positions of ownership and power and privilege. And I see that as deeper problems, to find sort of emotional ways to connect with people, to find the common good. And that's my question. Thank you.
I wonder if I could share one example that I heard about. I don't want to give away the name of the company because I think that is confidential information, but I have been in discussion with a company who is quite keen to do the ECG balance sheet. They already are, they've already gone through the B Corp process, and they were interested to find out whether the Common Good balance sheet would add anything to them. They're quite a pioneering company, and it's a family-owned business, and they are very keen to be, as the owner put it in one conversation, they're very keen to be part of the solution and spread the solution rather than being part of the problem. And the owner, so I was talking about ECG, and I particularly did talk about how motivating it is for staff groups to get involved in implementing the information gathering and the decision making around the issues raised by the matrix. And then the business owner shared with me a problem because she wanted my opinion on it. And so honestly, she didn't go as far as to say, we as the family owners of this business would be willing to share the ownership of the company with the staff. That she didn't go that far. They were only in their first couple of years, but she was very willing to share as much of the decision making as she could to the whole staff team, and including about salaries, including about hours, to really make it a transparent, co-determining process. And that was before she'd seen the Matrix. It was one of her aspirations, and she'd already been experimenting with that. And so I would say I don't know how far she would go on that journey, but she's open to a lot of power sharing. And she described the opposite problem to me, and she didn't know how to understand it, that she could not engage some of her most long-serving and loyal staff that she really believed in, who worked really, really well. They were not interested in that side of things at all. And she had tried different strategies, and there was just no movement in that. So I'm wanting to contribute that to the conversation, just as a way of saying that you're right. I agree with you completely that this is as much about psychology as anything else, and that it is a very complex picture, and we don't understand enough yet about what are the levers for change at an individual level.
Can I just say something about that? Because it's something I've been kind of researching and thinking about also with my students quite a lot. I think one thing that is quite astonishing that at least I haven't seen in the literature around the commons and common good is the ethics of care. And I think this, and relational ethics of care, which means how you treat others the way you want to be treated. So it's a relational position. It's not about justice. It is not about rights, which is a kind of right and wrong morality. It is about a relational ethics of care. And I think once that is put into position, and you start to think in relation to the other, then I think some of these things shift. So that for me is one component of that, which is really, really important. The other thing is the terms of engagement at the beginning of when you set something up. So with our organization, Public Works, we decided to have our students collaborate with us after they've been our students, collaborate with us for a period of time, and then we mutually decide whether they become a director, in other words, equal to us as founding partners, founding directors, or whether they decide to go their separate way. So there was no kind of no commitment at that early stage. And the moment that we had to formally do this, where they become completely equal, I mean, it's a non-for-profit, so it's not really, the shares is not financially distributed, but still they were a majority, and me and my colleague, who were the founding members of 20 years, were the minority. And so they could get us out, right? So the power shifts. And I was like near to tears, but I said that was the terms within which we engage them, and that's the terms we have to comply with. So I think it is a little bit, the terms of engagement are never that clear. And I think even with the Commons Assembly, some of the European Commons Assembly, some of the conflicts that happened there, it's because the terms of engagement were not very clear in terms of what was collaborative, what wasn't collaborative, how people needed to engage. And so I think there is quite a lot of designing that actually has to happen into the commons to be what we want them to be. And the common good also resides in common interest and common good as stuff, right? So this kind of common interest, again, there is a whole mechanism through which this common interest has to be found, and it would be found in plurality of lots of little interests having consent, you know. So I think I've been thinking about what Tim is talking about quite a lot, because I've actually come out of a lot of these movements because of this kind of slightly conflictual relationships that I found quite stressful for me personally. So I didn't want to be part of it. So to think, how do we go forward if this, I mean, this is my life. I believe in this stuff, but this can't work like this. So I do think there are lots of principles and this idea of, I think when you were talking about your organizations that you were talking about, they were ultimately creating communities of trust. And I think you know, the bakery or all of that, it's a circle of different communities, be it the people they're selling to, be it the ones who are working there, be it the people that are part of the larger network. And once it's a slight reframing of thinking, rather than thinking about employee, where the cooperative thing of employee employer, that still has hierarchical, even if it's a cooperative, it still doesn't have that kind of caring, trust making, community making aspect. So I think that's maybe the way to think about it as well, that we are a community here. What are we trying to achieve and what are the terms? So I just wanted to put that out there because
that's very interesting.
Let's go through, because I don't want anybody's questions not to be answered. So David, how much influence, power, etc. does the ECG model has in the Americas, North America and Latin America?
We've got a little bit of presence in North America. So in the United States, there's an association, ECG Membership Association, though it's in its very beginnings. We've also got an activist in Niagara Falls, and I was actually in a meeting with him today, and he's made contact with a town in Canada. I think it's called Nanaimo. They've recently adopted the donut. They're using the donut economy model, and he's got in touch with them, and they're having a discussion. So it's another area where the kind of two models can cooperate. For Latin America, there are 12 countries. So we have Chile, who's a founder member of the International Federation, and we have 12 countries in Latin America that are collaborating together, they're training consultants to work to use the balance sheet. They've got some companies that have already done the balance sheet there, and they're talking to new economy movements and also the Banca Etica in Uruguay and possibly other countries. So that's very much a growing part of the movement.
Great. Thank you. I'm just realizing there's quite a lot of fantastic discussion, but lots of messages being put in. So Diana says, balance sheet to me means numbers. Are there specific metrics on the balance sheet that enable comparisons, target setting, etc.? Or is it a soft narrative approach?
Sandra, do you want to take this one?
I'll take that, sure. So ECG doesn't set out to define universal targets or levels of achievement. What it sets out to do is help organisations to assess their own performance. So there are numbers involved. It is a numerical system. So there are points in the framework for levels of whether one is an exemplary practicer of a particular work approach, or whether one is a beginner, or whether one is in the middle, or whether one is very poor at it, or whether one is actively harming through the particular field, the 20 fields that the matrix takes, and there's more detailed questions behind those 20 fields. So there are numbers involved. It is a scoring activity, and two things happen. Companies score and assess their own performance according to the guidelines that ECG provides, but also in order, if companies want to publish a balance sheet on their websites, then they need to call in an ECG auditor that has absolutely no connection with the company at all. That's very, very rigorously enforced. And so then the auditor may score things differently, either worse or better, and then that produces some conversation. But essentially, it tries to bring two approaches together. There is a numerical approach, but there also is a narrative approach and an evaluative approach. And the emphasis is on how to keep getting better rather than achieving thresholds, numerical thresholds. That's not the approach that ECG takes. It's continuous improvement that is the approach that ECG takes. It's not setting universal standards.
Thank you. Sorry, I lost my spot. An example of where organizations, I suppose we've had that, both in terms of what I said, in terms of giving up power and privileges. So I think maybe we move on, but I think I also have a little bit of a problem with the giving up of things, because I think we're not going to get to everyone if we're asking people to give up things. I think it's more about sharing and enabling those things. So if the power is used to dominate and to dominate over, to have power over rather than power to, you have to also have power actually individually. Without self-empowerment, you can't actually empower others. So I do think you do have to have power. You just have to make sure that that power is not used to dominate in terms of decision making or in terms of other things. So I think we need to be a bit aware of that. Otherwise, I think it's a bit too ideological for me, at least. Then it is the common objective from Tim Peake to rethink value so that it includes social and environmental values in a single accepted for, whereas now we see public good as a cost on rather than a benefit to the economy.
Bridget, I don't know, I'll just offer something to start that. It seems to me that the emphasis within ECG and it may be languaged differently, but really the emphasis is on externalizing the benefits. And if we really think about what does that mean, that is an approach that is about regenerating. And I'd like to offer that as a framework, that actually the consideration is about how can I, as my organization, whether it's a private sector or a public sector organization, how are we contributing towards regenerating our society, regenerating Earth, and also as part of that, externalizing the benefits and sharing the benefits rather than holding all the good to ourselves and externalizing the costs. I'd put those two things together as a kind of meta objective. Bridget, I don't know if you'd like to add to that.
Not really. I mean, from the work, from what I know of Mariana Mazzucato's work, and whose institute you quote there, you know, that's very much about that partnership between the public and the private, you know, to achieve common goals, to achieve, you know, common goals for society, for societal thriving. And, you know, that, you know, that's totally about reimagining the role of public money and, you know, a role that's kind of often forgotten, you know, in the process. And her great example is that of the iPhone, isn't it? Of the public money that's spent on the research, and everything that makes it a smartphone has been publicly funded. So yes, it is about kind of reimagining value. you know, and what we value, and measuring what we value. I'm not sure if we answered your question correctly.
Well, I think earlier on in the talk, you also talked about those relationships a bit more between the environment, the ecology, and those different relationships. But so Matthew asks, and I'd like to say something about this as well. If we rely on trust when we get back into situations of structural privilege, where those with most implicit power can push their interests first, but under the banner of looking after everyone. I mean, relying on trust without embedding it into legal frameworks in the way that inequality law has supported the struggle against systems of oppression under the guise of public interest. So can I say something?
Yeah, please do, and I'd like to add something.
Yeah. So I think that the thing is that I think if we rely on law and legal frameworks all the time, that sets up a privilege anyway, because not everybody first has access to legal systems or to the understanding of that language and their legal rights. So I think actually the trust that is built on in the everyday, in your everyday relationships, everyday kind of encounter, whether it's in the workplace or whether in your neighborhood or whatever, that has much more. And Mothia, maybe we just discuss it rather than if you want to chip into it again. So maybe unmute and we discuss it. And so I think there could be again those settings where you in dialogue, and I think that's a thing that I think again. The facilitator of a commons setting, I think they need to be in control of not making sure that common interests of the few is not what becomes the kind of decisions, if you like. But that is the whole principle of how you actually come into knowing common interest. You know, the whole design of how you gather common interest, that's part of it in order to be quite reflective. But the idea of trust building is about it needs time. You know, it is something that you need continuously, and it does, I think it also needs training and education, just because, especially in the system like the UK, where that is just not part of the dialogue, that is not part of the socialization of our society. So these kind of alternative models of sharing knowledge around these as values, or this ECG, for me, is one of those models, could become triggers for us to be trust building through the process of practice. Sorry, that's...
No, I completely agree with that. And I would just like to add what might be a nuance, and I don't know if this is what's in your mind, Mothio, but throughout my career, particularly in diversity and inclusion, I found that there was quite a lot of what I would call, forgive me for this, but what I would call confusion about the word trust. And there seemed to be an assumption that trust, if we're going to trust each other, then we need never to share information. We just need to believe what everybody else says. And I think, and I don't know how common that is now, because it's a while since I've worked in that sector, but I think there's a very profound misunderstanding. And I think that what goes hand in hand with trust is transparency. And then what goes hand in hand with trust and transparency is co-determination, which is the ground on which the power dynamics can be addressed. If those three principles come together, and that can include writing things down as agreements, because then there is transparent records of what's been agreed, and therefore there's an opportunity to revisit them if things go awry, which they will likely do. Then I think that those things are worth unpacking. And I do think that in terms of the ECG values, I really, really, really think a lot about the power of transparency and co-determination, partly because of the transparency bit. I think it's a prerequisite for everything, and it doesn't imply lack of trust. It's part of the process of building trust, it seems to me.
So can I just add a point? Yeah, because I'm a lawyer by training, and I sense the profound distrust around the law sometimes around. And I do agree, trust, transparency, and I'd say the third thing is accountability as well. And I was quite interested in what you said about externalizing the benefits, because there is some, I'll just put a link, because we also need to rethink what the purpose of the law is and how it works. And sometimes, because Eleanor Ostrom talks a lot about these systems, and we often think about the commons as just everybody has a right, but this idea that there are rules that get created by those who have the interest in common, but there's going to be different interests that are always vying for that space, and so they'll be rubbing up against each other, and the power comes in by which group then says, I'm representing your interest in taking this place of commonality. And so that's where we get up to, and where we need something that brings that accountability for that which gets marginalized. And that's where I was kind of coming from, and seeing in lots of cooperative spaces and space on the commons, we don't often have many people of brown, black interest actually speaking for themselves, and that's I guess where I was coming from.
I think also, I mean, just having done projects with kind of different socioeconomic, ethnic groups, it also, again, it's time. You need a lot of time for them to actually get the confidence to speak, because they've been socialized, some of them, not all, some of them have been, especially women. I mean, I've been working with quite a lot of Bangladeshi women who just don't feel like they can say very much, or they keep saying themselves that they're stupid, and it's a lot of work to actually to get them to be re-socialized into a position that they can have a voice. So I think a lot of it is also, I think it's a lot about these nuances about social relationships, which for me is the thing that either makes a commons work or be destroyed. And I think it's they're so nuanced, they're so small. If you say something and somebody gets annoyed, and if it's about power relationship, they're so subtle about all these kind of relationships. And I think that's why I put care at the heart of it, because if you have that at the heart of it the whole time, then you won't then you're much more aware of those relationships that are being problematic. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. Tim.
Yes, thanks for all those comments. I think they're really interesting, particularly about transparency and co-determination. I think they're really useful. I suppose what I'm reflecting on is it's like as a society, we have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Like we have to do a whole preparatory changes before we're actually up to the level at which we need to work together on this kind of common good, in your phrasing, or the commons, or whatever. And it's very difficult to understand. I remember talking with other people in the commons. The trouble is that we have to just do it, and as we do it, we come across problems, and we have to then sort of refocus, realign the thing. But it is really hard, and I really take on board what Taranj says about people having different levels of access to the whole business of being in a group and making decisions together. And it's hard work. It's like a complete re-gearing of people's. I know people who are working in those kind of communities you're talking about, Taranj, and people are very damaged, frankly.
And they don't want to engage anymore because they feel so hurt by it emotionally. But I think the other thing is that, I forgot what I was going to say, but okay, maybe somebody else speak until I remember.
Could I just ask one thing? Because I asked a question about people having to give up their positions, because because although, yes, we might like to think it's for a bigger thing, I think a lot of people will think they're losing out. I mean, I just say that will be their preposition. But did you also get a problem, or do you have the problem of people sort of just not wanting to put that kind of effort into being in a more engaged community, you know, whether in a business or some people just want to be told what to do. I mean, there's a lot of people who've just sort of made that decision about their lives. You know, I do my work, and I have my wonderful hobby and my family and the things I love, and that's it for me. You know, so that kind of a change, which is actually requires, that is what's necessary, but that's difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what I was going to say, that again, talking about contracts, you know, that the project that I'm doing at the moment, the whole thing about it was that it would be collaborative with a community organization. And they said, yeah, we work collaboratively. But then when it came to the contract, they chose a hierarchical contract, a building contract, and they did not want the collaborative one. I paid for a training in a collaborative contract, and they still want, it's what Tim is saying, they still wanted to be the client, although the client posed more risk, and then they say they're very risk averse. So it's very complicated in that sense. And so I made them sign a collaborative agreement to talk about a culture of collaboration kind of attached to this hierarchical contract. And so every time that they start to be quite, you know, hierarchical, I point to that agreement that they've signed. But the thing is that it's socialization. They know that system. So they're comfortable, they're familiar in that system. And the collaborative thing, one, they don't know how to collaborate. They use it as rhetoric, you know, because it sounds good. It's what Monsieur was saying. It's in the public interest. It sounds good. They don't know how to collaborate. So that's what I was talking about in terms of skilling and training, that people need to, in practice, not just, it's not theoretical, in practice, they need to learn to collaborate. And that needs generosity and giving up power and, you know, all of those things. And then they have to also be confident enough to accept the unfamiliar. So it's a lot to ask, you know, and I think that is all part of the re-socialization. And, you know, even my students that I spend a year with, some of them say, oh no, but I don't want to give up my power. You know, I have to think about it. I have to think about it for a while to see whether, and then the people who are working with me don't want it. It's what Sandra was saying. They don't want the responsibility. So I think there are nuances and complexities, and that's why not everything has to be a commons, you know, as well. Monsieur, yeah.
Yeah, I was just, because some of the circles I'm sort of working with around that sort of this aspect around around different different epistemologies, and different thinking. So for example, like you might not think that people in marginalized communities, or they're hard to reach, because there's this kind of cognitive wall that happens, that these hard to reach, only hard to reach from the majority group, and they're not hard to reach from their own communities, so they will get quite annoyed. Yeah. But in those languages, for example, Dawa, what I was talking about the law thing, is that the idea of relational ethics is already in my mother's culture. So that idea of the relational aspect is so important, and you could almost think about, and in other Islamic cultures that may already be there, and the thinking that isn't. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it is, but I also had to think about my mother when I was thinking about hard to reach, you know, because she won't engage with anyone outside the Iranian community. You know, she finds it really uncomfortable. She also doesn't understand volunteering. You know, it's like, you know, it's not something that's culturally part of, you know, charity, yes. volunteering in civic democratic decision making? No. You know, so I think there are, of course, there are those cultural differences that, I mean, I talk quite extensively against volunteering. You know, I'm all right with it in terms of reciprocal labor, but in a neoliberal context, I have a problem with it because it's extractive labor for public for our public services. So anyway, but I think, yeah, I mean, gosh, we're this is too interesting to stop.
I wonder if I could say a tiny thing though.
Yes.
And even though, but somebody is going to have to talk after me because it's too negative points to end on, I'll be honest with you, I warn you. But there is something about, I just wanted to add into the picture of this let's call it cultural complexity that we're exploring. I just want to bring it back to, as you just have done, Taranga, about the economic system that we're in, and to link that with Tim's point, because what we're partly talking about is asking people to sacrifice, and we are not in a culture that understands sacrifice as what I would call an archetype. And when we're outside of that culture, what sacrifice begins to look like is martyrdom and self-harm. And we're in an economic system that promotes the survival of the fittest and all of those macho ideas. I mean, that's the very simple way of expressing it, but the very, very deep competitive winning mentality that our economy expresses, there is a real level at which people are frightened of putting themselves at risk in what is called real life. And when they talk about real life, they're talking about the economic system, which is the opposite of real life, actually, as we're learning with the environment. But and I think that we have to factor that in as a valid set of fears that people have.
But I think
concerns, and then it's about how do we paint different pictures, and how do we bring a community of people to step forward together rather than as lone heroes. It's too much to ask people to be lone heroes.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, you know, that's the threshold that people need to understand, that they're not giving up power, they're sharing power, and in sharing power they become stronger. And I think that's what I say to local authorities. You know, I'm saying, when you're sharing power with communities, you're not giving it up. You are sharing it, and through that extension, that's the relational again, through that extension, you've expanded your horizons of power. And I think that's that mentality, that's the kind of shift in thinking. With me giving up my directorship, not giving it up, but sharing it with 7 others, who were my students, who I trust, right? If I didn't trust, I would not do that. So the trust was really important. And I've had relationships with them for 5 years as my students, as my collaborators. But that trust allowed me to trust them to take that position where I trust blindly that they will not chuck me out, right? So, but what that means is that I'm not responsible solely for generating income for them, because they have to generate it based on their own interest, based on their own abilities, based on their own, and they can control the funds that they generate, you know, so they're in control of the whole project. It becomes more like an umbrella, and it means that the message of the practice spreads without me, you know, doing this all the time. So I think that's what people need to get, that actually by concentrating power, you are not more powerful. But that's the patriarchal model of, or that's the patriarchal kind of thinking of power that we have to dismantle.
I agree.
You know, anyway, thank you so much. And that was really wonderful. Thank you all for attending. It was really, really really exciting. I hope you join those few of you who are hardcore commoners staying here. Hope you join tomorrow, because I'm hoping that's going to be really interesting. It's a topic I don't know very much about, the Commonwealth Lease, which is a kind of legal model of land ownership, which the government wanted to replace the leasehold model, but it hasn't taken off. And Marie Knowles is the is an expert on Commonwealth leases, and hope to see you tomorrow. But otherwise, thank you so much. The recording will be available within the next couple of weeks on our website if you wanted to share it. Thank you, everyone.